Hi, I'm poet and writer Kay Spivey. I was lucky enough to win Mary Kay Gower's collection Sensuality. Now I'm going to hold it up. I want to apologize in advance. It came in the mail this way. I think it got pretty beat up in the post. So you can see post office wise, it's a little beat up. But this is her collection that she sent to me, and it took me a little bit to get around to reading it. But I had to sit at the dealership for quite a while to get my cart fixed, and I brought this along and I'm so glad I did. I finally got to read it. But I wanted to start off with something slightly different because I also had plenty of time to read Billy Collins' collection, The Trouble with Poetry, which was heavy on the snark. It was pretty funny in some places and really like heavy and amazing in others. Billy Collins is one of those who's slightly controversial because he writes a little bit simple poetry, but I always say he is a great gateway into poetry, and he also looks at poetry from a very interesting perspective, one of a teacher teaching students, but also a poet who deeply appreciates the art of poetry. So I wanted to start this whole video reading the first poem from this collection because it really comments well on all the commentary going on in the poetry community right now, and this poem is called You, Reader. I wonder how you're going to feel when you find out that I wrote this instead of you. That it was I who got up early to sit in the kitchen and mention with a pen the rain-soaked windows, the ivy wallpaper, the goldfish circling its bowl. Go ahead and turn aside, bite your lip and tear out the page, but listen. It was just a matter of time before one of us happened to notice the unlit candles and the clock humming on the wall. Plus, nothing happened that morning. A song on the radio, a car whistling along the road outside, and I was only thinking about the shakers of salt and pepper, that they were standing side by side on a placemat. I wondered if they had become friends after all these years, or if they were still strangers to one another, like you and I, who managed to be known and unknown to each other at the same time. Me at this table with a bowl of pears, you leaning in the doorway somewhere near some blue hydrangeas reading this. I thought that was really good. There were a couple more poems in here that were along that line, being like, poetry, y'all. And he comes to the conclusion that the trouble with poetry is it makes you want to write more poetry. And I just thought it was a really brilliant collection. Some of these poems I had heard him read before, but I had never sat down and read this collection, and I really enjoyed it. I have a lot of favorite poems in here, but that's not what we're about today. We're talking about this collection, which surprised the heck out of me. It's such a tiny little collection. I watched Mary Kay Gower's videos on YouTube, but I guess I hadn't really listened to her poetry, and I didn't know much about her. She has quite the eye for like movement, quite the eye for like vividity of details. Vividity? She uses real vivid details, y'all. I believe I double checked on Goodreads, and there's only 14 poems in this little chapbook collection, but the poems are really powerful. I would say the most powerful two poems, the two that were just like, whoa girl, like this is a good collection, were the two dancing poems. So she has two that start with dancing, and one is Dancing the Shadow Maker, and Shadow Maker is in quotations. Oh, that's terrible, you can't see that. And the second one is Dancing to Bedroom Hem. And both of them are written so that you can visualize a ballet in your head, like a whole scene from a ballet. Maybe I like ballet, and maybe someone who doesn't know anything about ballet at all would not be able to, but for me it was like exceptionally vivid how the dancers were moving through the dance. And she has a lot to say otherwise in each of the poems. The Shadow Maker was really nuanced and like torturous in one sense. This one was a lot more violent, like sexual violence. The other one was a lot more lusty. Well, if you're here, you have to say hello. Look at his little face. Oh, do you say hi? There's Zuko. Okay. But like, ooh, Sensuality is a really good name for this collection. A lot of the poems were very sensual or sexual, or discussed sexuality, and they discussed women, and they discussed love, but all in a very inclusive manner. I read a lot of poetry, and a lot of contemporary poetry especially, and I think this line is one that Jen Campbell said about her own collection that someone had said to her, and I feel like I've said this before, but she said, once the poems are written down on the page, the poems are now for the reader, they're no longer for the writer. But I feel like I've read a lot of poetry recently that was the writer writing for the writer's sake, and a lot of that's so important in poetry. It's so important to use it as a type of catharsis. Write down what you needed to hear, and a lot of people, that is really impactful, and that is a lot of what the current contemporary movement is about, is you writing down things that would help you and other people relating in the exact same way and feeling those same emotions. That is good. But when poetry gets really good, it's when the poem is for the reader. It isn't the writer injecting themselves into your life. It is you getting to experience the same thing. They've given the poem over to you, and this is a collection where she gave those poems over to me as the reader. I got to experience these poems completely. Very masterful. I was really surprised. As a collection, and especially those dancing poems where it just like hit me. And then my favorite was actually Her Gaze, which I just wrote wow on the page next to it because I really liked it. I'll just read you that first stanza of Her Gaze where I was just like, wow. A candle among many, lighting lilting flames from one to another, each signaling the beginning, blowing dust from the wall. I paint the lines. I am going to go ahead and link you. At the back of the collection I found, she has already read all of these poems aloud herself. It's basically an audiobook that's on her YouTube channel. So I'm going to link directly, the first link down below is going to be directly to her reading her own poems, so you can experience the magic. And so I can listen, I've just read them so far. I haven't listened to her read them because I loved it, but also I would love for you to be able to listen and experience them as well. So that'll be linked down below. I'm really glad I got sent this. It was very refreshing, and it was a great way to be spending my long boring time at the dealership. Thank you so much. Not saying I wouldn't have read it if I wasn't at the dealership. I also wanted to talk about myself for a minute. NaNoWriMo's over. Congratulations. I'm pre-filming this, so I don't know how NaNoWriMo went, but right now I'm having trouble keeping up. I'm about a day behind. Today was supposed to be my catch-up day, but as you have seen, instead I read a lot of poetry books. Speaking of poetry, my own poetry book, Fragments, Fragments, is going to be available for free ebook. So if you have not read my poetry collection and you're like, I'd check that out, but for free in ebook form, your chance is coming 7th of December. You are going to be able to go, I'll link that down below. I think I'm going to put this video out before that time, but once the day comes, the link will also be below Mary Kay Gower's link, second link, yes. And you can check out my book and read my poetry and see what you think of it, and see if I managed to capture the whole idea of the poetry being for the reader, or if mine was a little bit too much for me. And you know what? I feel like that's a valid point, and we don't talk about that enough, that like poetry book should feel like it's yours, that you get this book. It should be the same kind of reading experience you get from a novel you loved. So yeah, please go check that out. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a look at my free ebook. Support me that way. Support me by checking out a book for free. And that'll be all for today. Please go check out the links down below. Let me know what you think if you read either my collection, Billy Collins' collection, or Mary Kay Gower's collection. Let's talk about poetry. And I will talk to you again soon. Good luck to all of us. Bye.